The depths of space often harbor secrets more formidable than any found upon the surface of a planet. Among drifting stars and shimmering nebulae, entire civilizations rise and fall, their histories etched in cosmic dust. Empires flourish on the edges of known space, frontiers bristle with tension, and worlds once unknown bloom with alien majesty. For all the centuries humankind had charted the stars, it had never quite relinquished its thirst for power, wealth, or glory. Nor had it lost the capacity for compassion, though such kindness was sometimes buried beneath the harsh realities of an ever-expanding galaxy. It was in these turbulent times that Kane Mercer, a solitary human mercenary and rumored war hero, found himself in the labyrinthine halls of Duke Varek's fortress on the far side of the planet Ithis Prime. The fortress, a marvel of smooth black stone fused with advanced metals, perched on a cliff overlooking a sea-tinged turquoise by the planet's twin suns. The fortress's corridors were lit by pale, fluorescent lights that hummed low in the background, and the air smelled faintly of ozone and incense, a peculiar mixture that left many visitors with a sense of awe and unease. Kane had arrived at the fortress at the behest of the infamous alien Duke, who had offered an unusual mission. Kane's reputation for unflinching bravery and startling efficiency preceded him. It was said he had once single-handedly decommissioned an entire pirate fleet while hardly breaking a sweat. Yet, beneath the veneer of stoic professionalism, Kane was searching for something beyond wealth or renown. He sought a purpose that might soothe the nightmares he carried from the wars he had fought. Duke Varek was the ruler of a sprawling dominion known for its elaborate ceremonials and for Varek's towering presence. He was not human, but descended from an ancient alien race called the Orsil. Tall, slender-limbed, and crowned with small horns that curled from his temples, the Orsil had a penchant for elegance, both in battle and at court. Their skin bore iridescent patterns that shifted with their mood, and Duke Varek's own markings glimmered a deep maroon, reflecting an untrusting and cunning personality. Kane stood before the Duke in a chamber reserved for official ceremonies. It was grandiose, with pillars carved from white stone, and an arched ceiling painted to mimic a galaxy's swirl. Guards in polished armor lined the walls, their stares cold and impassive. Varek, draped in regal robes that caught the light in subtle, mesmerizing waves, regarded the human with a faint smile. "I have heard extraordinary tales about you, Kane Mercer," the Duke intoned, voice resonating off the marble floor. "It seems you are willing to travel anywhere and do anything, so long as the compensation matches your skill." Kane gave a slight bow, lips twitching into something approaching a polite smile. "I have bills to pay, Your Grace. If you need a job done, and the reward is sufficient, I don't shy away from the risk." Varek's eyes shone with amusement. "Forthright. Good. I appreciate someone who does not waste words. I am seeking a trusted and discreet mercenary to handle an unpleasant complication in a neighboring sector. Payment will be substantial." Kane nodded. He had, of course, heard rumors that Duke Varek trafficked in arms and ran clandestine deals with less than reputable warlords on the edges of imperial territory. But as a mercenary, it was not his place to question the methods of his employer, only to decide if the money outweighed the moral costs. Before more could be said, a quiet shuffle sounded at the far end of the chamber. A figure emerged, a young Orsil woman, slight of build, draped in a dark, silken shawl. She moved in a hovering wheelchair, guided by small anti-gravity thrusters, her legs and lower body wrapped in a protective covering. The patterns upon her skin were dull, their color drained by years of infirmity. She kept her eyes lowered, as if she expected no kindness from those around her. "This is my daughter, Lysara," Duke Varek said, the faint smirk creeping upon his lips. "A fragile creature, as you can see. Her condition renders her immobile, though her mind is interesting. She has studied countless tomes and gleaned knowledge few possess. Yet she is of no use to me physically. I am told she has the gift of tongues or some psychic sensitivity, bah. For me, she is more of a burden than an asset." Kane glanced at the woman, his heart stirring with sympathy. Though the Orsil spoke with casual cruelty, Lysara's presence touched something within him, a memory, perhaps, of the broken soldiers he had left behind on distant battlefields. He tried to catch her eye, but she did not look up. Instead, Her hands fluttered nervously over the arms of her hover chair. As part of our bargain, Varek continued, I shall provide you something unique. Consider Lysara a gift. Keep her, discard her, or set her adrift in the blackness of space for all I care. She is to be yours. He flicked his wrist as though swatting a trivial insect. A gesture of goodwill from me, your future employer. Kane's eyes narrowed. Your Grace, with all due respect, I'm not in the business of dealing in sentient beings. I've no need to own anyone. Varek's laugh echoed around the chamber. Of course not. But consider that Lysara might have some use beyond the purely ornamental. She can recite star lanes from memory, parse coded transmissions, and glean small truths from the gloom of cosmic secrets. Many have found her strange abilities beneficial. Kane stood there, uncertain how to respond to such a callous arrangement. That the Duke would treat his own daughter as a joke, a means to flaunt wealth or power, disgusted him. Yet refusing outright might invoke Varek's wrath. Moreover, compassion pricked at him. If he left Lysara behind, he would consign her to the Duke's continued disregard. The uneasy sense that Lysara was more than a pawn gnawed at Kane's conscience. Fine, Kane said, forcing neutrality into his tone. I'll accept your gift, but only if Lysara herself agrees to come with me. He glanced at her. She hesitated, trembling slightly, then gave the smallest nod of affirmation. It might have been fear, or perhaps hope, behind that nod. Kane couldn't say. Still, it was enough. Duke Varek smiled thinly. Excellent. Now we may discuss your mission. 3 days later, Kane found himself guiding Lysara through the corridors of his starship, the Gray Horizon. It was not a large vessel, but it was reliable, sleek, militaristic lines, a hold capable of storing an arsenal, and quarters just spacious enough to accommodate Kane's meager needs. He had quickly improvised to give Lysara her own small cabin, quiet, well-lit, with a viewport so she could see the stars. Varek had laid out the mission succinctly. Kane would travel to the remote moon of Zilner, disrupt a certain arms deal that threatened the Duke's own business interests, and quietly ensure that none of the participants survived to reveal the sabotage. It was a dark job. Kane felt his stomach twist with guilt, but the credits offered were astronomical. With those funds, he could finally retire from the mercenary's life, perhaps start a new chapter somewhere peaceful. But Varek's promise to deliver Lysara as part of the bargain hung over him like a pall. She spent her first hours on the Gray Horizon in near silence, barely responding when he tried to engage her. He brought her food, coaxed her gently to tell him if she needed anything, but her answers were distant. Only once did she attempt a direct conversation, and it was to ask, "Do you truly mean to follow my father's instructions?" He had paused, uncertain how to respond. "I don't know yet," he admitted, and that was honest enough. On the second day of the journey, while the ship cruised on autopilot through the dull, gray reaches of slip space, Kane visited Lysara's cabin. He found her gazing out the viewport, her unblinking eyes fixed on swirling patterns of starlight. Her skin's iridescent lines drifted in subdued tones of turquoise, giving her an almost ghostly appearance in the dim light. When Kane entered, she angled her hoverchair slightly, as if to acknowledge him, but said nothing. He cleared his throat, easing himself into a seat nearby. "I wanted to check on you, see if you need anything. The gravity's stable, the hull's pressurized, but if there's any special accommodations your condition requires, just tell me." She turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze. For a moment, her eyes sparkled with curiosity, though she quickly dropped them again. "I've lived with this for so many years, I barely know what it feels like to walk," she said quietly. "But, thank you. You're the first person in a long time who's asked what I need, rather than telling me what I can't do." An awkward pause followed, broken at last by Kane's confession. "I'm sorry about the way your father handed you over. It was humiliating and cruel. I couldn't stand the thought of leaving you there, not if I could help it." A ghost of a smile played across her lips. "I'm used to it. To him, I'm only a worthless chip to barter. Still, I'm not entirely helpless. Not as helpless as he thinks." Kane's brow arched. He remembered Varek's mention of her unusual gifts. "Your father said you have some kind of psychic talent. Telepathy, or?" She hesitated. "It's not telepathy in the strict sense. I can sense patterns and data, glean intangible connections and information, and sometimes in the mental echoes left in a place or person. It's subtle, often intangible, but if I focus, I can unravel mysteries that would baffle most. I also sense contradictions. Secrets. My father used me more than once to sniff out traitors or to interpret coded transmissions. It was the only thing that made me of use to him. Her voice caught slightly, but she pressed on. But I can do more than that, if I only had the means. The means? Kane prompted gently. She closed her eyes, taking a shaky breath. My body is paralyzed, but there exists advanced medical technology that might grant me mobility again. Cybernetic scaffolds, neural regenerators, or gene therapies. If I could afford it. But that's always been out of my reach. So instead, I studied science and technology, hoping one day I might figure out how to heal myself, or at least come closer to a cure. She paused, turning to look at him. You asked about my father's job. I have a suspicion that this arms deal on Zilner is more complicated than he implied, and I suspect it has something to do with stolen medical research as well. Kane's eyes flickered with interest. Stolen medical research? Are you sure? She nodded. Before we left, I heard rumors. Something about experimental augmentations to create super soldiers. The kind that might drastically accelerate healing and rebuild damaged limbs. If it is the same technology, it might help me, if we can get our hands on it. And maybe do something good with it, instead of letting it fall into the black market's clutches. It was a bold proposition, and it pressed on Kane's heart in a way nothing had in years. He still remembered the broken bodies of the men and women he served with in the Tarthan Wars, remembered the guilt of surviving unscathed while others were left disabled, neglected, or lost. The chance to do more than fill his pockets with blood money was alluring. It offered a glimmer of atonement. All right, he said slowly. Maybe this mission can serve a different purpose than your father intended. You and I, we might just do some good. A spark lit in Lysara's eyes. Thank you, she murmured. They lapsed into companionable silence. Out the viewport, the swirl of slip space warps glowed, painting the cabin walls in faint blues and reds. Kane felt something shift within him, an inkling of hope, or perhaps simply the calm before a brewing storm. The moon called Zilner hung against the darkness like a pearlescent disk, pocked with craters and ringed by a thin atmosphere. On its surface sprawled a settlement of prefabricated structures, domes sealed against the frigid environment, connected by pressurized tunnels. It was a den of warlords and smugglers, a place where the unscrupulous could ply their trade away from prying imperial eyes. Upon landing in a battered docking bay, the gray horizon drew curious stares from the local roughnecks. Kane and Lysara disembarked, the latter's hoverchair draped with a cloak to ward off the biting cold that seeped through the settlement's aging environmental systems. The facility smelled of grease and stagnant air, and a gloom lingered in every corridor. They made their way to a dingy tavern that doubled as a negotiation den, guided by Lysara's quiet directions. The contact they needed to sabotage was said to be a vile warlord named Cashin Morn, whose pockets were rumored to be lined by rival houses of the Orsil Empire. He had arranged a weapons exchange with prospective buyers from the Varek Collective. According to Duke Varek's instructions, Kane was to infiltrate the deal, sabotage it, and ensure no one left to implicate Varek. But hidden beneath that mission was Lysara's personal quest, to locate the stolen medical technology rumored to be part of Cashin Morn's contraband. She had gleaned enough from Varek's data caches to suspect that Morn's stash contained prototypes for advanced mobility implants, exactly what she needed. Inside the tavern's smoky confines, clusters of alien species nursed drinks or engaged in hushed negotiations. The air reeked of chemical stimulants. Pulsing lights cast shifting shadows that gave the place an underworld vibe. Kane scanned the crowd, noting the group of heavily armed mercenaries seated near the back, likely Morn's men. A tall, broad-shouldered figure with a face scarred from acid burns conferred quietly with them. That's Cashin Morn, Lysara whispered, her eyes narrowing. He's the ringleader. Kane inclined his head. Right. Let's see if we can arrange a meeting. It did not take long to draw attention. One of Morn's underlings approached, eyeing Lysara's hoverchair with vague amusement. You lost, friend, the goon sneered at Kane. Don't usually see mercs traveling with their invalid cargo. Kane kept his composure. I'm here to talk business with Cashin Morn. I have an offer I believe he'd find quite profitable. The underling snorted but waved them over. They were escorted to Morn's table, where the warlord eyed them with suspicion. "You look like trouble," he growled. "What do you want from me?" "Information," Kane replied, slipping into a seat. Lysara positioned herself at Kane's side. Despite her quiet demeanor, her eyes flicked rapidly, observing everything, taking in the details. "Word is you have access to a certain shipment of top-shelf contraband. Medical augmentations. The kind that could fetch a fortune from the highest bidders." Morn's acid-scarred lips twitched in a predatory grin. "You heard correctly, but it's not for sale to just anyone. My current arrangement is with the Varek Collective, and they're willing to pay a premium." Kane feigned a casual shrug. "I represent another buyer who might offer you more than the Varek scum, but we'd need proof of authenticity. Let me see a sample." Morn's eyes narrowed, his caution warring with greed. After a moment, he waved a subordinate over, whispering instructions. That underling disappeared into the back room, presumably to retrieve the contraband. As they waited, Morn addressed Lysara directly, his tone dripping with condescension. "And who's this little broken doll? She with you for luck?" Kane's face hardened, but Lysara spoke up before he could respond. "Sometimes the broken can see what the whole cannot," she said quietly, a strange glint in her eyes. "The tech you have, does it involve neural lattice scaffolding?" Morn raised an eyebrow. "Indeed it does. Why? Planning to fix yourself up, cripple?" The callousness stung, but Lysara kept her composure. "Perhaps," she said softly, "if it's not defective. You never know with stolen goods." Morn scoffed, but before he could retort, the underling returned, gingerly carrying a small metal case, about the size of a datapad. He set it on the table and opened the lid. Within, suspended on a cushion of anti-static gel, lay a slender implant of silvery filaments. "An experimental biotech augmentation," Morn declared. "Enhances synaptic responses, rebuilds degenerative nerves, even fosters telekinetic capabilities if integrated with an orsal physiology properly." The scientists who invented it vanished. Some speculation they were killed or bribed to keep their mouths shut. "One piece of this is worth a starship, maybe more." Lysara's breath caught. She stared at the filaments as if they were a holy relic. "Incredible," she murmured. "It's real. A neural lattice scaffold, and it's fully integrated with an adaptive AI seed." Kane forced a nonchalant nod, though his heart pounded. This was it, the key to fulfilling Lysara's hopes. If this truly worked, it could restore mobility to her paralyzed limbs. But they could not simply purchase it outright. Duke Varek wanted to sabotage the whole operation, likely destroying the contraband to keep Morn's power in check. Kane thought bitterly of the Duke's cruelty. There had to be a way to secure a piece of the technology for Lysara without bringing the wrath of Morn or Varek upon them. "All right," Kane said, "let's talk price. My buyer is prepared to pay more than your current arrangement, but I'll need safe passage off this moon with the goods." Morn eyed him suspiciously. "You think I crossed the Varek? They'll be here soon to finalize the deal. If they suspect I'm double-dealing, I'll have a war on my hands." Kane leaned in, lowering his voice. "The Varek don't have to know. Hand me a single sample first. If we can replicate it or reverse-engineer the design, we'll pay extra for the entire stash and cover your silence. You get your money, no conflict, no trouble." An uneasy silence. Morn clearly weighed the risk and the potential payoff. Greed flickered in his scarred features. At length, he gave a curt nod. "Fine. One sample, one day to finalize. But if you try anything, I'll feed you to the free sands outside. Understand?" Kane plastered on a confident grin. "Deal." The underling carefully placed the filaments back into the case and handed it to Kane. Morn looked pointedly at Lysara, then chuckled. "Who knows? Maybe you'll walk again, girl. But you'll owe me. Big time." They parted ways soon after. Kane and Lysara left the tavern, hearts pounding. They had the prototype, at least a piece of it. Now they had to figure out how to do what they'd come for. Sabotage the deal to please Duke Varek, but also secure enough of the medical implants to restore Lysara's mobility. And all under the nose of a ruthless warlord and the approaching Varek Collective. With the precious case tucked under his arm, Kane returned to the gray horizon alongside Lysara. Inside the ship's small medical bay, they placed the case on a counter, opening it under the glow of sterile lamps. Lysara carefully lifted the filament-laced device, her expression reverent. She ran a diagnostic scanner over it, occasionally murmuring about the advanced design. "I can't believe I'm holding it in my hands," she whispered. "So many nights, I dreamed of technology like this, something beyond what the Orsil Empire allocated for invalids or veterans. This might be the single greatest leap forward in neural regeneration I've ever seen." Kane watched her, feeling a surge of protectiveness. "Will it work for you? Is it safe to attempt an integration?" She bit her lip. "It's incomplete. This is just the main lattice. For a full integration, I need the companion module that merges the lattice with the spinal cord. The secondary piece might be in Morn's stash. If we can't get that, then I might be able to jury-rig something, but it'd be risky and incomplete. And I'd still need a surgical suite, specialized tools. If we do the procedure wrong, it could kill me." Kane sighed, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "We'll figure this out. But first, we have to deal with Morn's transaction and sabotage the arms deal. Then we can try to secure the rest. Are you sure this technology is entangled with the arms trade?" Lysara nodded vigorously. "Yes. My father and Morn are connected through various black market channels. The same shipments of advanced weaponry also contain these super soldier biotech implants. If we don't do something, it'll flood the underworld with unstoppable soldiers. And I have no illusions about what Duke Varek plans. He wants to maintain a power balance that favors him, so he'll pay you to sabotage Morn, but I suspect he'd prefer the tech destroyed rather than let anyone else have it. If he suspected we intended to keep it for ourselves," she paused, trembling, "he'd kill us both." Kane frowned. "Then we'll keep it a secret, for now. Let's come up with a plan." They talked late into the night, or what passed for night in the perpetual gloom of Zilner's settlement. Kane's plan was to set a timed sabotage at Morn's warehouse, where the arms and medical crates were kept, then trigger an explosive meltdown once Morn and the Varek arrived to finalize their deal. It would appear an accident, wiping out both sides and ensuring no one discovered Varek's involvement. But before the meltdown, they would slip inside and retrieve the rest of the biotech implants Lysara needed. They spent hours reviewing the layout of the settlement, memorizing the warehouse's security protocols, double-checking infiltration routes. Lysara's uncanny ability to spot data patterns proved invaluable. She discovered vulnerabilities in the security grid, times of minimal guard presence, even the passcodes used in the main vault. Kane watched her in awe, marveling at the brilliance behind her gentle eyes. She was so much more than the broken doll her father had called her. Finally, they were as ready as they could be. Under the artificial dusk of Zilner's battered colony, Kane and Lysara approached Morn's warehouse. The building squatted like a beast in the gloom, surrounded by a perimeter fence topped with flickering energy fields. Guard towers loomed, shining beams of light across the frosty ground. The place exuded a sense of silent menace. Kane crouched behind a stack of metal crates near a side entrance, checking his gear. He wore a form-fitting tactical suit laced with ballistic fibers and a plasma sidearm holstered at his thigh. Lysara hovered beside him in her dark cloaked chair, every bit as determined as he. They had timed this infiltration to coincide with a shift change among the guards, trusting in the momentary lull to slip in. "All clear," Lysara whispered, her eyes half-closed in concentration. She'd managed to hack the local security feed from a small datapad strapped to her chair. "Go now." They moved swiftly. Kane disabled the side entrance's lock with an electronic override. Once inside, they found themselves in a narrow corridor lined with crates. The clang of distant footsteps echoed, but the immediate area was deserted. Lysara used the hoverchair's silent thrusters to glide behind Kane without a sound. Following the layout she had gleaned from stolen schematics, they navigated deeper into the facility. On the ground level, they spotted row after row of illicit firearms, plasma rifles, railguns, an arsenal that could supply a small army. But the real treasure lay beneath. They descended via a cargo lift to the sublevel vault. Here, temperature controls and biometric scans sealed away the most prized contraband. When they reached the vault, Lysara pressed a small device against the access panel. It beeped, the lights flickered, and the door hissed open. Within the climate-controlled chamber, carefully packed in black containers, they discovered the motherlode, row upon row of biotech implants, each labeled with coded references. Lysara's eyes brimmed with tears of astonished relief. "This is it," she breathed. "More advanced than I imagined. Some have additional modules for psionic amplification, possibly intended to create an elite Orso warrior. Kane moved quickly, rummaging through the containers until Lysara identified the particular module she needed to fuse with the sample they already had. He slipped the item into a protective case. Then he set about placing small charges around the vault. Timed explosives, powerful enough to incinerate the contraband once they were at a safe distance. But just as they finished rigging the charges, an alarm blared. Red lights flashed, and an automated voice crackled through the facility's PA system. Security breach in sublevel vault. Intruders detected. All personnel, respond. Kane cursed under his breath. He checked a handheld monitor that connected to Lysara's bypass device. They've triggered a silent alarm earlier than we expected. We need to move. Lysara nodded, face pale but resolved. We have the implants. If we can just get out of here, we can perform the surgery somewhere else. Let's go. They raced back toward the cargo lift, the klaxon wail reverberating off metal walls. Halfway there, a squad of armed thugs burst around the corner, weapons drawn. Kane dove behind a crate, returning fire with disciplined shots from his plasma pistol. Lysara steered herself behind a nearby pillar, her hover chair making her a smaller target than a standing soldier. Shots echoed in the corridor, sparks flying as plasma impacted bulkheads. Kane dispatched two of the thugs with pinpoint accuracy, while the others scattered for cover. In the momentary lull, Lysara closed her eyes, focusing. She tapped into that hidden sense she possessed, sharpening the probabilities of the moment. Kane, on your right, she cried abruptly. He spun just as a guard tried to flank him, unleashing a plasma bolt that cut the man down. Kane's heart thundered with adrenaline. They advanced down the corridor, exchanging fire, until at last the path to the lift was clear. They darted inside, sealing the doors behind them. Up they went, the lift rattling. At the main floor, the doors slid open to reveal two more guards, weapons raised. Kane hurled a flash grenade, blinding them momentarily, and stunned them with quick strikes. Lysara hovered close behind, the black market implants clutched tightly in her lap. Outside, the perimeter fence shimmered with heightened defenses. The entire facility was on alert. Guards rushed in from all sides. Kane clenched his jaw. They had no time for a protracted firefight. Lysara, can you shut down the fence from here? She rapidly tapped on her datapad, brow furrowed. I can trigger a power overload in the fence's generator, but it'll blow out the perimeter near the front gate. That's where the guards are thickest. Better that than no exit at all, Kane growled. She hit the override. Instantly, bright arcs of electricity crackled along the fence's edges, shorting out the perimeter field. A section of the fence blew outward in a shower of sparks. Kane and Lysara dashed through the confusion, ducking behind scattered debris. Gunfire rang out around them. Kane fired back, laying down suppressive blasts. One bolt grazed Lysara's hover chair, sending up a plume of smoke, but she managed to keep moving. At last, they cleared the fence line, sprinted across the yard, and reached the battered docking bay where the gray horizon waited. The ramp lowered at Kane's remote command, and they boarded the ship in a flurry of motion. As soon as they were inside, Kane slapped the control to seal the hatch. He raced to the cockpit, Lysara right behind him. The engines roared to life. Guards poured into the docking bay, firing wildly, but the gray horizon lifted off in a cloud of dust and scorching thrusters. The moment they cleared the bay, a distant rumble rolled across Zilner's surface. Kane's charges had detonated in the warehouse vault, obliterating the illicit arms and leaving no trace of the stolen biotech. Hope that pleases Varek, Kane muttered, hands dancing over the controls. But we still have ours. Lysara nodded, cradling the case that held the precious implant. That explosion should ensure Morn's deal with the Varek is ruined. But Morn himself might still be alive. And if he is, he'll want revenge. Not to mention my father. The moment he learns we took some of the implants for ourselves. Kane managed a grim smile. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Right now, let's get off this rock. The gray horizon soared skyward, leaving the chaos of Zilner behind. Slip space once again enfolded them in an otherworldly tapestry of color and motion. In the med bay, Lysara worked feverishly, setting up the stolen implants, calibrating them for her physiology. She examined the raw data on her datapad, adjusting the neural lattice code to account for her orso biology. Meanwhile, Kane checked the ship's sensors. For now, no pursuers trailed them. Yet he had no illusions that their theft would go unnoticed for long. Exhausted from the infiltration, they took shifts resting and tinkering with the delicate filaments. Eventually, Lysara declared she was ready to attempt the procedure, sooner, perhaps, than was ideal, but time was against them. Each passing moment increased the chance that Varek or Morn would track them. In the med bay, Lysara lay on the operating table, the neural lattice scaffold arranged meticulously along her spine. Kane, wearing the limited surgical gear the ship could provide, helped position the device. His hands trembled. He was no doctor, and the technology was beyond human science. Yet Lysara guided him, her voice steady despite her fear. "I'll remain awake," she said softly. "The lattice requires a conscious mind for integration. If I slip into unconsciousness, it may misalign. I'll guide you, but, Kane, if something goes wrong, don't," he whispered, swallowing hard. "We'll make this work." She managed a small, brave smile. Then she pressed a series of commands on her datapad. A hiss of anesthetic and neural stabilizers began to flow around her body, numbing the pain but keeping her mind alert. Kane watched in awe as the filaments shimmered, seeming to move with a life of their own, gently burrowing along Lysara's spine. She gasped, back arching. Her skin glowed faintly, the iridescent lines brightening in shifting patterns of gold and violet. The neural lattice interfaced with her nerves, bridging the damaged sections that had denied her mobility for years. Kane listened intently to her hushed instructions. Increase the regulator feed by 2 points. Good. Now attach the power coupler. Slowly. Minutes stretched into hours. Kane's arms ached from the precision required, but he pressed on, sustained by the quiet intensity in Lysara's eyes. At last, the final filament locked into place with a soft chime. Lysara exhaled, trembling. "Disconnect the main bypass." "Now," she murmured. Kane obeyed. A moment passed, then Lysara's body convulsed, her breath catching in her throat. For a terrible second, Kane feared she would die there, on the table, undone by an untested technology. But the seizure eased, her posture relaxed. She blinked, her gaze focusing on the ceiling with a sense of wonder. He helped her sit up. She tentatively moved her arms. Nothing new there, for her upper body had always retained some mobility. But then she stared down at her legs, trembling with an emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. "Try," Kane whispered. "We can do it together." She reached out, bracing herself against the edge of the table. Slowly, deliberately, she willed her left leg to move. At first, nothing happened. Then, like a child taking its first step, her foot twitched. It was a small motion, but to them, it might as well have been a miracle. Tears streamed down Lysara's cheeks. She closed her eyes, concentrating fiercely, and the leg moved again, this time more deliberately. She slid off the table, unsteady, knees buckling. Kane caught her, supporting her weight. Her breath came in shuddering gasps, but she managed to shift her weight onto her feet. They wobbled, threatened to collapse, yet they held. She looked at Kane, eyes shining. "I can stand," she whispered, voice thick with awe and tears. "After all these years, I can stand." Kane's own eyes burned. He gripped her arms gently, helping her maintain balance. "You did it," he said softly. "You did it." Lysara let out a choked laugh, half delirious with relief. She tried a small step, nearly toppling, but Kane braced her. For long minutes, they practiced this halting dance, each step a triumph. And then, abruptly, Lysara's posture stiffened. She drew in a sharp breath. Kane frowned. "What's wrong?" "Pain." She shook her head. "No, it's something else. I can feel the lattice humming. My senses are expanding, as if I can taste the signals in the ship's electronics. Feel the data streams beyond these walls. It's overwhelming." He guided her gently back onto the bed, letting her rest. "Easy. It might take time to adjust. You said the implant could amplify your mind. Seems it's doing just that." She held his hand, trembling. "I can sense you, your heartbeat, your worry. It's not reading your thoughts, exactly, but it's close." And the outside, like a swirl of data, swirling in the darkness of space. So much information. Exhaustion overcame her, and she drifted into a restless sleep. Kane sat by her side, his emotions churning. He couldn't deny the admiration and something deeper he felt for her. When had she become more than just a responsibility or a way to challenge Duke Varek's cruelty? Somehow, in the midst of danger, he had come to care profoundly for this brave, brilliant Orsil woman. He pressed a gentle hand to her shoulder. "Rest," he murmured. "We'll face whatever comes next together." They emerged from slipspace near a quiet star system on the outskirts of charted territory, a place known for scattered mining colonies and minimal traffic. Kane wanted time to let Lysara recover from the procedure, to let her test her newfound abilities. For the next few days, she practiced walking in the corridors of the gray horizon, leaning on the bulkheads for support until her muscles gained strength. The neural lattice was doing more than healing her physical paralysis. It was forging new neural connections that enhanced her reflexes, her senses, even her natural psychic talents. Kane discovered that she could now hack electronic systems without even touching a datapad, merely by attuning her mind to the digital frequencies. He saw it firsthand one morning when she absent-mindedly locked and unlocked the cabin doors by thought alone. She apologized, flustered by the sudden potency of her gifts, but Kane only smiled. It was wondrous, though perhaps dangerous if others discovered her potential. Yet their respite did not last long. On the 5th day, alarms blared in the cockpit. An unidentified ship had dropped from slipspace, scanning the area. Kane rushed to the controls, Lysara hurrying behind him. "It's an Orsil vessel, heavily armed," Kane muttered, reading the sensor data. "Transponder codes. They belong to the House of Varek." Lysara's face paled. "My father's men. They must have tracked us." Kane clenched his fists. "We can outrun them if we slip back into warp." "Wait, they're hailing us." A crackle sounded over the comm, followed by a sharp, officious voice. "Gray Horizon, this is Commander Desen of the House of Varek. Disengage your engines and prepare to be boarded." Kane cut the transmission, exchanging a look with Lysara. "We're not letting them board," he said firmly. She nodded. "We might not have a choice. Their cruiser is faster and heavily armed. They'll open fire if we try to flee." Kane's jaw tightened. "So we fight. I'm not giving you up." Her eyes glistened, but she drew a resolute breath. "We'll do what we must." Vague. And so began a frantic chase through the system's asteroid belts. The gray horizon dove and weaved, thrusters flaring. Behind them, the Orsil cruiser fired pulses of green plasma, each shot singing dangerously close. Kane pushed his ship to the limit, executing near-impossible maneuvers among the floating rocks. Occasionally, a boulder took a hit that would have pulverized them. Still, the cruiser gained ground. Finally, a lucky shot glanced off the gray horizon's port side, jolting the cabin. Alarms blared, panels sparked. The engine output dropped. "Kane!" Lysara shouted, gripping the co-pilot's seat. "We're losing power." He cursed, scanning the readouts. "We can't outrun them anymore." A hail crackled again. "Gray Horizon, power down and surrender Lysara Varek immediately. You cannot escape." Lysara's face hardened. She placed a hand on the console, shutting her eyes. "Maybe I can do something. My father taught me to hide my talents. But now, with the implant, I might be able to disrupt their systems." "How?" Kane asked. She didn't answer in words. Instead, she focused, sending her consciousness out into the digital ether. She felt the cruiser's targeting computer, the flow of commands from its bridge, the chatter of binary pulses that regulated its weapon systems. With the enhanced neural lattice, she reached out telepathically to the ship's systems, slipping past firewalls and encryption codes. Sweat beaded on her brow. Then, in a surge of mental will, she overloaded their targeting sensors. On the cruiser's display, chaos reigned. The gunners shouted in confusion as their reticles spun uncontrollably. The main cannon shorted out, fizzing with electric arcs. Seizing the moment, Kane fired the gray horizon's thrusters, accelerating around a large asteroid, effectively vanishing from the cruiser's sensors. By the time the enemy overcame Lysara's sabotage, the small ship had slipped out of range. For now, they were free, but the damage to the gray horizon was severe. Kane found a hiding spot in the shadow of a massive asteroid, forging a temporary safe haven. They powered down non-essential systems, and Lysara slumped in her seat, trembling with the mental strain. "Are you all right?" Kane asked, worry etched into his features. She nodded weakly. "Just drained. That took a lot out of me. We won't have long before they recover and resume the search." He stroked a hand across her back gently. "We'll think of something." Days turned into weeks of cat and mouse across the stars. Duke Varek's forces, outraged by the betrayal and theft of valuable biotech, pursued them relentlessly. Word spread quickly that Lysara Varek, once a powerless invalid, now walked and wielded fearsome mental abilities. Some in the Orsil Empire found the notion inspiring, others terrifying. But in the face of this adversity, Kane and Lysara drew closer. Their alliance grew into something tender, shaped by mutual trust and admiration. Kane found himself confiding in Lysara about the regrets of his military days, the friends he lost, the despair that had driven him into mercenary work. She, in turn, confessed to feeling caged all her life, used as a pawn by her father, convinced she would never know true freedom or love. In stolen moments between battles, they laughed at small jokes, found solace in each other's arms, shared whispered dreams of a future unbound by war or fear. The strange union of a human mercenary and an Orsil duke's daughter defied the prejudices of both species, forging a bond that was both fragile and profound. Their final stand came sooner than they hoped. Duke Varek himself, commanding a formidable battlecruiser bristling with advanced Orsil weaponry, cornered them in a desolate system ringed by cosmic debris. Kane's ship, battered and short on supplies, had little chance of escape. A looming confrontation was inevitable. As the massive shape of Varek's cruiser drifted ominously closer, Kane steeled himself. "We can't outrun that. We can't outgun it either." Lysara's jaw set in determination. "Then we fight another way." They broadcast a message on open channels, calling for allies. Over the past weeks, rumors of Lysara's defiance had reached corners of Orsil society. Some believed Duke Varek's cruel tyranny had gone too far. A handful of rebel cells, outraged by Varek's corruption and illegal dealings, had quietly organized. And now, in their hour of greatest need, those rebels answered the call. Small ships emerged from slip space, battered vessels carrying Orsil freedom fighters, humans, and other species who had suffered under Varek's manipulations. They rallied around the gray horizon, forming a ragtag fleet that defied the might of Varek's warship. The radio crackled with determined voices. "For Lysara Varek, for freedom from tyranny. We stand with you, Lysara and Kane." Duke Varek's voice thundered across the comms, dripping with contempt. "You would raise a mutiny against your own blood, Lysara? Ungrateful child. Surrender now, or I will reduce you and your pathetic allies to cosmic dust." Lysara's face hardened, but a tremor ran through her. "This ends here, father," she declared. "No more cruelty. No more betrayal." Kane took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Then they advanced. The rebel ships opened fire, harrying Varek's cruiser from all sides. Kane maneuvered through the chaos, letting Lysara tap into the cruiser's systems once more. But Varek had fortified his defenses. Her mental infiltration met fierce resistance, draining her strength. Laser bolts and plasma beams lit the void in a symphony of destruction. Smaller rebel vessels fell under the cruiser's withering barrage. Yet they fought on, emboldened by Lysara's courage. In the swirling melee, the gray horizon managed to slip close to the cruiser's hull, scanning for vulnerabilities. "There," Lysara said, eyes closed in concentration. "An unshielded exhaust port near the subreactor. If we detonate something there, it could cripple the cruiser." Kane readied a torpedo, locking on the coordinates. But a torrent of flak cannons hammered their approach. The cruiser's point defense hammered the small ship, jolting them violently. Sirens blared, instruments flickered. "We're hit," Kane shouted, fighting to keep the ship steady. "One of the engines is failing." Lysara breathed raggedly. "Just a little closer." "Hurry." Kane grit his teeth, coaxing the battered gray horizon forward. The cruiser loomed like a fortress, filling their view. A final burst of thrusters brought them into firing range. Kane pressed the trigger, launching the torpedo. It streaked across the small gap, guided by Lysara's mental tweaking of its targeting system. Time seemed to slow. The torpedo impacted the exposed exhaust port, erupting in a blinding explosion that cascaded through the subreactor. Inside Varek's cruiser, systems shorted, hull plating buckled. A chain reaction tore through the lower decks. The rebels cheered as the mighty warship's cannons fell silent, gutted from within. Finally, With a reluctant groan of metal, the cruiser's engines sputtered out, leaving it powerless adrift in the vacuum. In a final act of desperation, Duke Varek triggered an emergency comm. His face appeared on a flickering holoscreen in the gray horizon. His once regal features were twisted by rage, a bruise on his temple from the ship's failing inertial dampeners. "You have ruined me," he spat, glaring at Lysara. "For the sake of a worthless mercenary's misguided compassion, you destroyed your own father. Your legacy is ashes." Lysara regarded him sadly. "You gave me to that worthless mercenary as if I was trash. He taught me more about honor and love in weeks than you did in a lifetime. The cruelty ends here, father. Surrender." Varek laughed bitterly. "Never." With that, he severed the transmission. Moments later, sensor readings indicated an escape craft launching from the cruiser. Whether Varek fled or intended one last strike, no one could say, but the battered rebels had no means to pursue. They let him go, content that his dominion lay in shambles. A roar of triumphant voices filled the comm channels. The rebel fleet circled the crippled cruiser, securing the area. Throughout the battered starships, cheers rang out for Lysara, who had defied her father and sparked a revolution. The seeds of a new alliance were planted that day, an alliance forged by a human mercenary and the paralyzed daughter of an alien duke, now walking on her own 2 feet, bridging old divides with something far more powerful than fear: hope. Months later, on a lush planet near the galactic core, a gathering of Orsil, humans, and other species convened under the banner of the newly formed Coalition of Unity. They met in a grand hall carved from living trees and woven with luminescent vines, a symbol of renewal and harmony. Though the road ahead promised challenges, remnants of Varek's loyalists remained scattered, and other powers would undoubtedly seek to exploit the vacuum left by his downfall. Hope resonated in every speech and handshake. Lysara, standing tall with only a slight tremble in her legs, addressed the assembly. She spoke passionately about how she had once been cast aside for her disability, forced to watch from the shadows as her father spread corruption. She spoke of her journey to regain mobility, but more importantly, to find her own voice. She recounted how compassion from unlikely allies, how love itself, had awakened a hidden power far greater than any biotech implant. Kane, by her side, watched with quiet pride. He no longer needed the harsh anonymity of mercenary life. He had found purpose in helping Lysara forge a better future for Orsil and humankind alike. When the Council conferred recognition upon Lysara as a vital architect of interstellar peace, Kane felt an ache of joy. She, once dismissed as a fragile burden, now stood among leaders, revered for her wisdom and bravery. That night, under the shimmering brilliance of the planet's twin moons, Kane and Lysara walked alone through a peaceful glade. It was not lost on either of them that she walked unaided. No hoverchair, no mechanical braces beyond the subtle presence of the neural lattice intertwined with her spine. She paused near a pool of crystal-clear water, turning to look at him. "So much has changed," she said softly, her voice bearing the weight of gratitude and wistful wonder. "If someone told me a year ago that I'd stand on my own 2 feet, that I'd help spark a revolution, that I'd find someone to share my hopes and fears," she smiled, tears gathering in her eyes, "I would have called them a liar." Kane gently touched her cheek. "We owe it all to your strength and determination, Lysara. I just stood by and offered a helping hand." She shook her head. "You did more than that. You saw me when no one else did, saw beyond my disability and the politics. You gave me a chance, and in doing so, we changed the fate of empires." They stood there, bathed in moonlight, the distant murmurs of celebration drifting through the night air. Kane felt a rare peace settle in his chest. Slowly, tentatively, he leaned down to kiss her. Her lips met his, a gentle union that spoke of promises kept and a future being forged. When they broke apart, their eyes shone with unspoken words of love. In the sky above, stars winked in silent testament to the vast possibilities awaiting them. Alien worlds and challenges still loomed, but for tonight, they stood united, in body, mind, and spirit, proving that bonds of empathy and courage could traverse the deepest divides. In the end, Lysara had discovered not only the power within her own limbs, but the power of a heart unshackled by fear. And Kane, the wandering soldier, found a cause greater than money or renown. Their story spread across the galaxy, an echo in the void, a tale of two unlikely souls forging hope in the darkness, daring to stand together against all odds, and emerging, hand in hand, to greet the dawn of a brighter era. For them, and for many worlds besides, it was but the first step toward a tomorrow shaped by unity and by the hidden power that lies in every spark of compassion.